Right. Thanks so much for joining us today, Satyajit.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think you probably know the format a little bit. Usually, the first question, kind of, I asked our guest is like, "What is your origin story
Mhm.
to get into product management?"
Yeah, so b- before the origin story of product management, I guess I need to go into a little bit of origin story in general.
Oh yes, yes,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
The very
No, no,
first
no.
question is, how would you give some updates as if you were catching up with an old friend?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
let's
So
start with that. Yeah, let's start with that. That's
no, no,
right. Yeah.
no. Um, my background is sort of in educational background is engineering. I studied computer science in grad school. My first job out of grad school was at a startup that a professor that I sort of knew had started, and I worked there for a couple of years. I tried a startup of my own on the side, and somewhere in the middle of that, even as in undergrad, I had this idea that I needed to go off to business school. So I went to business school, did consulting for the summer, came away with the conclusion that I would not be a good management consultant, but that I wanted to find a job in tech. And I remember the week I left the startup was the first time. Even though people did product management at that startup, like it was really like the engineering managers, the CEO who really sort of did the product management. And so, but I remember the week that I was leaving was also the week that the startup that I worked at got acquired, and sort of that a little bit before that, someone with the title product manager joined the company. And I remember like I asked someone like, "Hey, what's she going to be doing?" And I was like, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting job." And so that was the first time I heard about the job. And then I would say a little bit later, after business school, I decided, I was joining Google. I joined Google in a partnerships role. But then when I was here, I sort of quickly realized that given my interests, which were sort of in technology, in thinking about products and thinking about business, product management was a better fit. And so I moved internally from and my job at Google at the time was at YouTube, and a little bit after that, I moved internally to product management.
So you joined Google not as a product manager.
Yeah, I didn't join Google as a product manager. I switched
Oh,
to product management within Google about, I would say, a year and a half into Google.
okay, okay. Was the transition pretty hard?
Yeah, I had 15 interviews.
Oh, wow.
I also, I think I was moving. It was I it's a little bit better now, but
Hmm.
only slightly.
Yeah.
But I think at the time I was moving, it was sort of, I think it was around 2009. So there was very it was actually the first time Google had done layoffs.
Hmm.
And I think as a result, they were cautious from what they're hiring, and so yeah, I had many interviews through the process.
Do you think your MBA background helped with the product management role?
I think it helped me. So, a lot of people ask me, do you need an MBA to be a good product manager? And I think the answer is no. But it definitely helped me become sort of be ready to take on this role. So my background before that was completely engineering. All the education that I had was sort of engineering and sort of in that vein. I do think understanding marketing, economics, even just sort of a broader exposure to business really broadened me as a person. So that whole MBA experience, sort of pushing, uh, even just interacting with different people, understanding different industries, getting a different view of the world, sort of helped shape who I am. And as a result, I think makes me a better PM. And so I think for me, it's probably why I ended up at Google. It's probably sort of why I sort of ended up like sort of doing the things that I did that got me to PM. So yeah, I think the MBA was critical in my path to product management, but I don't think it's required to be a PM.
I see. Yeah, I don't even have a master. I just have
Yeah,
an undergrad in engineering. I remember in one of your newsletters, you
yeah.
talked about like an MBA dinner, how you
Oh,
felt in that dinner.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
that was a great article. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that article was I sort of tell the story of like I was trying to figure out what to do, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
and everyone by the time I was in business school, There was this company that I had an offer to join full time,
Mhm.
and all my friends were like, "Oh, you should. This is a great offer. You should go."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they have this sell dinners, right? Like, oh, you should come, you should meet people. And that was the first time, as I looked at these people who are amazing people, right? Like,
Mhm.
I still think like those were like, I was like envious of all the people that I saw there. It's like, oh man. But I also realized like, oh, I don't want to be these people
Yeah.
necessarily. I
Yeah.
didn't see myself sort of on the other side of the table in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think that summer, like just spending time, like when I was in this internship, I was doing my job, but also reading a lot about like tech and what's happening. And I realized, oh, I should try and find a job that lets me spend more time, actually thinking about these things.
Mhm.
And I think, you can't always do this, but I think the closer your your natural inclinations and passions and interests align with what you're doing a lot of, I think you have a chance to like be happier.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think it sort of ended up in that way.
Yeah. Um, Definitely, that makes sense. So you've been at Google for a very long time.
Hmm.
The next question is a little spicy. Is like, how do
Oh,
you navigate politics at Google? Because I've been at companies that's really large, and I always find large companies wherever there are more people, there are more politics, right? So as a
yeah.
director, how do you navigate politics in general?
So I'll give you staged answers to this, right? Which is, I would say anywhere where there's more than like two people, the
Yeah,
politics start.
right,
I
right,
think
yes,
to your point, as you add people, like it
yeah,
gets more complex, incentives change, etc., etc. And I remember many years ago, I sort of thought of myself, and this was very early in my PM career, so I was
mhm,
maybe like 2 or 3 years in.
mm,
I remember complaining to a friend of mine who was also a PM at Google about like, oh, the politics. I don't like that stuff. I was just like focusing on the product and doing good work. The politics is not like good. And he kind of said, oh, that's an interesting, if immature answer, was what he told me at the time. And the more I thought about it, I was like, wait, what do you mean? He's like, look, there's high school politics, which is, oh, that person's terrible, that person's not good, I want more. And then there's thinking about politics in the sort of grander scheme of the word, which is building alliances, convincing people to like get an outcome of the world that you want, right? And I think there is it is important to understand anywhere how decisions are get made, right?
yeah,
Whether it's and I think when people say politics at a company, they generally mean how do you align decisions at a company to be what you want, and who do you convince, how do you sort of sell to people. And I think when you're doing this outside, like if you're we don't call it politics when you're convincing customers or you're convincing your board or convincing outside, like you're
yes,
sort of like you're hustling for some reason internally. It
yeah,
feels political and sort of painful.
mm,
And so I think the way I think it's something that doesn't naturally come to me. And it's something I have told myself, this is what I'm doing. Part of your job, I consider like anyone that's not, I sort of consider my job as sort of middle management, right? So I'm not an IC, I'm not at the top. I feel like anyone in middle management sort of has that role. You're unblocking your team, you're convincing people of like that this thing that you want to do is important. Even IC sort of have to do this, right? Which is if you believe a vision is important, you have to figure out how to make it happen. And a large part of a company, of sort of being in a large company, is making that happen. Who else do I need to convince? How do I get them on board? And I think that's a skill you need to have. Now, I think there is, so to me, I think of politics as like good politics is that, right? Which is how do you convince people, build alliances,
yeah,
get stuff on board? How do you anticipate what they want and
mm.
tell them how your vision fits into their vision, all of that stuff. There is, standard like what people think of as like bad or high school politics, which is who gets credit, whose
Yeah,
org is bigger, all of that stuff.
yeah,
I have tried to ignore that as much as possible, and
yeah,
like sort of you try and because once you go in that, at least again, every person's different, but at least for me, once I go into that loop, it's not a loop I enjoy. I think it makes me unhappy to like think in those terms, and so I try very hard not to focus on it. And I
mm,
find if you're good at the main thing you're supposed to do. I think
Mm-hmm.
all you can sort of results and how people enjoy working with you and what you do, you can sort of push away that sort of bad politics if you sort of focus on the
On
right
the
out.
bright side. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a great perspective. Like there are, you're right. It's just like there are good product managers, there are bad product managers, there are good politics and bad politics. It's not always like just like one sided. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you remember, it's not like, politics in the frame of like saying bad things about people or like trying to get more power versus the other person or try to win. It's more like, okay, I need certain outcomes and I can't expect people to do what I want. I need to convince them.
I mean, so,
I need to
yeah.
convince, and by the way, like I need to convince, my boss, the
Yeah.
VP,
Yeah.
the CEO. I need to convince different orgs. How do I do that? I
Mm-hmm.
think I prefer to think of it in those terms, and then it's easier.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a really good perspective. And then as a director of Google AI,
Mhm.
how do you keep yourself up to date with all the AI stuff? I remember
Really
you had
hard.
really one funny LinkedIn tweet or LinkedIn status that you talked about you needed like an AI summary for all the AI newsletter you subscribe. Like how do you do it? How do you keep up to date with stuff?
I don't. I'll qualify that with I've been in my new job in Google Research for
Mhm.
all of like a month and a half, right? So
Okay,
even
okay.
before that, I was very interested and I would try to keep up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think it's really hard. I think you try as hard as you can. Over time, you learn to read what is most. I've subscribed to like every AI newsletter that I've heard of,
Yes.
and most of them just sort of are filtered in my Gmail.
Yeah, yes, yes, yes,
And so
yes.
I think over time I've got to like, okay, maybe I should read this stuff. And frankly, like I think the difference coming into this team is now this is what everyone that I work with talks about all the
Mm,
time, right?
mm.
So it's a lot easier now because it's actually
I see.
relevant to very often to what I'm working on.
Yeah.
And I feel like earlier in my other roles, I was very extremely interested, and so I would have to carve out time to like learn about this stuff, but it wasn't directly related necessarily to like what I was doing day to day.
Mm.
I feel like now I feel less guilty about carving out time to like
Yeah,
do it
that's your
because it
job,
is
right? Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Also, and I also feel like I learn a lot by simply, frankly, I learn a lot just being over here,
Right.
and talking to
Yeah.
people and all of that
Right,
stuff.
right.
But I do sort of, it's really hard, and at the rate of change is so, like the thing that you read like a month ago may be irrelevant now, right?
Mm.
Just
Yep.
because stuff keeps
So fast.
changing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't try to keep up. I try to read as much as I can, and then sort
Mm.
of go from there.
So my understanding is that by being part of the world, doing your job, that's already,
Yeah,
like
I think
giving
that
yourself a space to learn. Right? Okay.
I think that it's like what I sort of tell, the way I've been starting to think about this is so growing up I've always loved like TV shows and movies,
Yeah,
and
me
I
too. I still
find
do.
both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's put it this way, right? Like 20 years ago it was reasonable for someone to say, "Oh, I watch most interesting new TV shows," because the world
Right.
was small, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right? Now it is impossible, right? Like
No.
there's so much good television, there's so many movies, you're not watching all of them, but you
No.
watch the things that matter and you watch certain things, you pick and choose,
Yeah.
and people are comfortable in that, hey, I'm getting what I want out of this, and I
Mm.
have cherry picked the things that I need to know. I think news about AI is sort of at this point, there's so much stuff is changing so often. We shouldn't expect to be comprehensive in what we know. I
Mm.
think like if there's certain things we miss, it's okay. If they're important, they'll come back again, like, sort of a month or two from now, like it'll be highlighted to you. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I no longer have that like on news consumption in particular over the years, and this is a function of being older.
Yeah.
You just sort of like, okay, I don't, if it's important, I'll probably find out about it later if I'm doing my job right and thinking about things. So I don't
Yeah.
need to be comprehensive day to day. Um,
Ah. Okay.
but I I still enjoy like learning a lot about this stuff, and so I sort of try and read a bunch of things, but I also find that once I'm in the domain, if it's really important, someone will ping me and say like, "Hey, by the way, you should take a look at this."
Oh, that's true.
Right?
That's true. Yeah.
And so I think that's the way I'm thinking about these things.
Yeah, like I mean, I think same. I work in e-commerce field, right? If there's a big
Yeah,
news, you will read about it sooner or later, whether it's through company email chain or like somebody say, "Hey, check this out. This is what happened." Yeah, right. You will learn it like one way or another. So
correct.
that's a good mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I no longer try to be like I know everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I love your analogy of the movies and stuff.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm a huge fan of those YouTube videos, like 5 minutes describing the whole movie
the whole
plot.
movie.
Yeah, I love those videos, especially the ones that I feel like I don't have time to watch, but like you get the quick
Yeah, I
summary.
guess they're great for like soap operas and stuff, right? Which
Yeah,
is like, oh yeah, I don't need to know the whole. I just need to catch up like 100
right.
episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So when did you decide on the transition from YouTube to AI field, and how was the transition? I assume you have to go through a lot of interviews, right? Like, how did it happen? And when did you say, "Oh, I want to switch"?
This case, it was a little. It was. So I would say, um, because I worked on search for many years. I worked
Yeah.
on Google search for about 8 years, and
Hmm.
then I was at YouTube for about 2.
Mm.
But the fact that I was on search for that long meant that I looked at some version of problems or sort of things related to AI and LLMs for a while, but we'd never seen this kind of progress,
Hmm.
right? So I would say like around the time uh, Chat GPT came out, I was like, oh, I need to
Last
spend
year.
more time. Like I
Okay.
literally like pinged like pinged. You'd sort of always been around AI, right? So I'd give talks on AI even before all of this, saying like, oh, look, all these things that weren't possible are now possible. So this is how our products are changing. This is how search is changing. This is how our understanding is changing. This is how photos is changing. I was giving all these talks, and so I was always interested, but it never hit me as viscerally as, oh, this is like something big is happening in terms of
Yeah.
how things are going, right? And so once that happened, I spent the next few months mainly sort of looking at just like learning as much as I could, right?
Mm.
Trying different tools, because I was at YouTube. I sort of spend a lot of time with creator tools and what's possible, video
Yes.
creation,
I
imaging, all of
love
that.
YouTube creation tools. Yeah. I love.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I spent a lot of time on this stuff and said, okay, I want to spend more time thinking about this.
Mm.
And so once that happened, I sort of thought about, okay, where are places that I might be able to do this? Which teams should I talk to? I talked to a bunch of teams internally and sort of figured out, okay, what is it? What is something where I can be useful to the team,
Hmm.
and at the same time, um, you know, I would get to sort of learn what I want to do, right?
Mm.
And so I talked to a few different teams, and the role that I'm in, which lets me do sort of where I sort of help the product and UX teams be successful across a bunch of like applied AI projects.
Hmm.
I found that like role spoke to me. I felt like I could be most useful to that team, and
Yeah.
I was super interested in the work they were doing. And so
Hmm.
I think that ended up. Once that happened, I sort of you talk to the team, you go through a formal interview process.
You still have to go through the interview process, right? As a
You
director,
still
right?
always have to go through an interview process. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Um, yeah.
that's amazing. So you definitely paved the road for yourself. Like when you,
In this case, yeah. In this
in
case,
this
I
case,
paved the road for myself.
it's
Yeah.
been like a very good preparation. I see.
Yeah.
And then I know every day is different as a product manager. Some days, you're reading news. Some other days, you're attending conferences. But if you have to describe a typical day of yours in this new role as a
Yeah.
director of
Yeah.
AI, what is such a typical day? If there was one, maybe
Yeah.
there's one. Yeah.
I think it's too early for me to tell what a typical day is. But I think, right now I'm still ramping up, right? So
Oh,
I've
okay,
been in the
yeah.
job about, I'd say it's been about maybe 40 days that I've been in the job.
2 days.
But
How big is your team?
I don't think I'm supposed to.
Oh,
Let's
sorry. Oh,
leave it
okay.
at that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I will. It's a significant team.
Oh,
No. But I'd say right now I'm still in the process of learning what everyone is doing. And so
Okay.
the thing is, I broke up what, you sort of always, it's useful to have like a plan for the first, 100 days, let's call
And
it.
then 90 days. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. 100 days. Yeah.
Uh, and so the first 30 days, really, it's doing a lot of project reviews, meeting a lot of the people, and saying, okay, who's doing what? Do I understand what they're doing? And do I
Mm-hmm.
understand what their plan is? And so right now it's been a lot of meetings because I'm meeting the team on a regular basis. I'm doing sort of project reviews. I'm meeting a lot of like more sort of senior people as well as their stakeholders to like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, let me understand what you want out of this team. Let me understand, what partners at search and YouTube and all of these other people want out of this team. So right now it's a lot of just exploration.
Mm-hmm.
But I think once that's done, I'll get to sort of more, okay, let us define with the PMs and UX leads and folks, sort
Mm-hmm.
of define, okay, for this subgroup and sub team, what is the plan going forward? Like, what is your strategy? What are you hoping to get done, next year, this year, all of that stuff.
So for your first 40 days, is
Hmm.
this what you kind of expected more or less? Or there's a lot of surprising things to you
Well, that's a good
when
question.
you made the switch?
Um, I no, I think this is so far. I'd say this is what I expected,
Okay,
right? Like,
okay, that's good.
which
That's good.
is, I think, yeah. So far, it's what I expected.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
So I mean, I'm so happy you made the transition. Like seriously, I think it's a really great fit, and then I'm excited to see
yeah.
what your
I'm
team
really
does.
excited. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
really excited. I think it's a good fit for me. It's
yeah,
sort of, yeah, it's the right mix of sort of experiences and interests. So I'm super excited to jump into it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. All right. One last question.
Yeah, of course.
Is that so? I know you have two kids,
Yes.
and what is some advice you have for people who want to climb the career ladder, but also want to maintain sanity at home? Because I
Ooh,
have one kid, I have a toddler. It is insane. So I don't know how working parents, mom or dad, right? How people handle.
yeah, yeah.
How do you like climb the ladder, but also say, hey, I want to have a more balanced family life, you know?
So I think, uh, everything is a choice, right? So the thing I have always believed and remembered is, there are all these studies about people and what makes you happy and all of that stuff, and they do these studies with people towards the end of their lives. And the thing I have always remembered, actually, ever since like, so I have a 10 and 6 year old, and so ever since my older kid, my son, was born, is you nobody ever remembers towards the end of your life. You don't really remember like, okay, how many work projects did I do well at, how many meetings went well. You remember your kids, you remember your friends, you remember the life you lead, right? And I sort of remember that even with my dad and stuff, right? Which is, um like, so I given that that, right, what
Yeah.
are the things you should prioritize given that, right? So I
Mm.
think you should prioritize. I try and prioritize things on the same stack, right? Which is, uh, going to watch my kids' sports thingy
Yeah, yeah.
versus like, spending, an extra hour on some, work meeting.
Hmm.
These are all choices you make,
Right, right. Yeah.
right? And so to me, like, I think you have to choose these things, and
Mm.
uh, I think it's important to like not. The danger is you start resenting the trade-offs, right? You resent like, oh, like I'm sort of annoyed at work because it's taking away from time with my kid, or
Yeah.
you're annoyed at your kid because like, oh, you're like disturbing my work meeting. And I think it's important to realize both things are important, and I don't think they're necessarily trade-offs. I think good environments understand that people like need to do other things but can also successfully do work. So I think there are lots of tricks. So I sort of have a rule. Most people that I work with sort of know this, which is just like, I don't take meetings between 5:30 and 9:30, right? Which is, I mean, sometimes I have to, and then there are work events, etc., and I go, but I try really hard to block that time out. So I work with a lot of people in Asia, and what they know is, hey, if they really need to get to me, like, I do take meetings after 10 p.m. I take lots of meetings until like well, well after midnight. But I prefer that because I sort of that act of like picking up my kids, going home with them, spending time, doing dinner and like putting them to bed and spending it's important. And I think that
Yeah.
is more important than like work meetings. I sort of I do early morning meetings, but like I also block off time from 7:15 to 8 because I need to get my kids ready
For
and
bed. Yep. Yep.
no,
Sleep
no,
time.
this is the
Yeah.
morning. So
Oh,
I
sorry.
get to
Oh,
work.
sorry. Oh, get ready for
Yeah, I
school.
do both.
Oh, okay.
I do
Oh,
both, right? So
yeah.
so 5:30 to 9:30, that's the morning. I sort of block those times off. And you can't always do it. Like there's
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
events, all of that stuff will happen.
Right. Right.
But you sort of need to say that this is important
Mm.
and you don't need to sort of do everything at work, right? Like once in a while, you can kind of say, I am this work stuff that I'm being asked to do, I can let go because the kids are
Uh,
important, right?
yeah.
And the downside, and I always warn people about this, the reason we sort of gravitate towards rewards at work is
Mhm.
the win is immediate, right? You get feedback from your peers. Like let's say you spend an hour at work extra, you made that much more progress on your PRD or like your deck
Right.
was
Right. That's true. That's
like
true.
the
But
reward is immediate, and so you
yes.
feel good about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
An hour with your kid may not even pay attention. You're like, wait, what did I get out of this, right? Uh,
Yes.
the reward is internal and may or may not happen like years from now.
Right. Right. That's so
So,
true. That's so true.
yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
you need to do it for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like you say, like I'm enjoying this time with my kid, and so I think that's the trade-off, which is why I think, at least for me, I think both can be done. I don't think they're exclusive.
Mm.
People, every I have seen enough great leaders at sort of the top of companies that or even people that I work with that I admire that
Mm-hmm.
know how to do both.
Yeah.
That I don't feel like these are like essentially choices you need to make, but you have to
Right.
be
Right.
very deliberate at it.
Yeah.
And sometimes like you have to be okay doing trade-offs, right? Which is that there were a couple of years where I felt like, okay, I, I'm I will not I will simply not be able to put in the hours at work that I used to
Mm.
because so then I need to figure out how to work smarter. I need to figure
Yes.
out how to delegate. I need to
Yeah.
figure out how to do these other things. And so I think you sort of adjust within time. But you also like the hopefully by the time you have kids, you've also gotten a little better at your job. So like you
Yeah.
sort of know how to be a little bit smarter about these things.
That's so true. Because after becoming a parent, I feel like everything is a prioritization. It does help
Mhm.
me get better at my job because you prioritize: do I make a healthy meal or do I
Yeah,
make a quick 5 minute microwave meal so I can finish other work later? So every single choice. But you're right. I think it's important to say to understand this is a trade off, right? You can
exactly.
like no, my philosophy is that nobody has it all. You have it all at different times, right?
Correct.
Sometimes you prefer more family time.
Yes.
Sometimes you have like crunch at work time. But it ultimately, you're right. At the end of everybody's life, like family is the legacy that you leave
Yeah.
behind. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing, which is you have to understand like there'll be ups and downs, right? Like,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think sort of looking at it as a portfolio of like the things that fill your life is a good way to think about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so true. When I talked to Malik last week, he mentioned that it feels like throughout his career, you're adding stuff in your suitcase as a skills, and then that just reminds me like parenting is also a skill. Like
100%.
sometimes I add more stuff to my suitcase and take off other things from my suitcase. So it's like how you prioritize because your energy and efforts level can only fit so much in your life, right?
Yep.
It's just like how do you put stuff in your suitcase, take some out, and then just reshuffle stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, and that suitcase and what's in it will always change. So yeah,
Right, right.
good way to think about it.
Yeah. That's so amazing, Satyajit. I'm gonna stop recording right now. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you so much for your time.